There is new tension in the Middle East today. Iran is defying international opinion and testing missiles over the Persian Gulf. Simon McGregor-Wood has details.
Iranian state television released pictures Wednesday of medium and long-range ballistic missile tests, all part of a large-scale military exercise on land and in the Persian Gulf. Included in the test, according to the Iranians, the Shihab-3, a long-range missile thought to be capable of flying 1,200 miles. That would put all of Israel and U.S. bases in the region in range. The test claim comes at a time of heightened tension. Increased speculation about a possible Israeli attack against Iran's nuclear program has produced Iranian threats of retaliation if it is attacked. Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has repeatedly threatened to destroy Israel, and in recent days senior regime figures have threatened to strike at Israel if Iran is attacked. A senior Israeli government spokesman contacted by ABC said Israel does not seek hostilities with Iran, but it is gravely concerned by Iran's nuclear program and its ballistic missiles. Israel is convinced Iran does seek nuclear weapons and says its missile arsenal will allow it to launch a nuclear strike against Israel. Today's missile tests took place in the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. That's a place where 40% of the world's oil supply must pass through to reach international markets. Not surprisingly, today the price of a barrel of oil rose as word of the tests spread. Simon McGregor-Wood, ABC News, Jerusalem.
And joining us now is Michael Shank, the Government Relations Advisor at George Mason University's Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. Mr. Shank, why so many missiles and why now? What's Tehran up to?
Well, Simon spoke to it a little bit. What they are doing is they are showing their military capacity in the way that Washington did on Monday with warships maneuvering in the Gulf with the UK. And it's what Israel did last month in flying 100 fighter jets in what many suspect to be preparation for an attack on Iran. So what Israel's doing, what Washington's doing, and now what Iran is doing is really showing the world their military capacity and making sure that all systems are a go in the event that an attack would occur.
But isn't this a double-edged sword? If, in fact, they are getting better militarily and they're still happy to support the destruction of Israel, isn't that just waving a red flag in Israeli faces?
Well, there is definitely some red flag waving going on. I think what the U.S. could and should do at this moment is what they did when North Korea tested its missiles several weeks prior to its destruction of the nuclear reactor. So what the U.S. has done repeatedly with North Korea is send Ambassador Chris Hill for high-level negotiations to North Korea. The U.S. has not done that with Iran, neither has the U.K. Thankfully, the EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana will be going this Saturday to meet with Iran. But what the U.S. and the U.K. need to do is what they did with North Korea, which is high-level diplomacy and high-level negotiations.
Yeah, how do you expect Tel Aviv to respond to this?
Well, it's certainly not necessarily in Tel Aviv's kind of political interests. It's certainly in their long-term security interests. Thankfully, cooler heads are prevailing at the Pentagon here in Washington. Admiral Mike Mullen, who is the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is calling for exhaustive diplomacy, as is House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Howard Berman. They're both calling for unconditional talks. The White House is unfortunately using these missile tests as justification for the missile defense shield in the Czech Republic, which is escalating relations with Russia. But thankfully, at the moment, cooler heads are prevailing at the Pentagon and in Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's critical, is it not? Because no matter what the Israelis plan to do, any action by them would require at least the tacit approval of the United States.
That's right, which is why military analysts here in Washington are suggesting that they would take action prior to a presidential campaign by Obama, where he would take the election, because Obama would be less supportive of that than Senator McCain, in the event that Senator McCain would become president. But again, it's in the long-term security interests of Israel, Iran, and the entire region to pursue high-level diplomacy now, because what we have is everyone showing their military bravado, and all we have to do is light a match, and unfortunately, it will engage all militaries.
In reaction to the situation in Afghanistan, the U.S. Navy moved an aircraft carrier, I think the Abraham Lincoln, was it, to support operations there. Would you expect U.S. forces to be on the move in reaction to this missile test?
Well, unfortunately, U.S. forces are already on the move and prepped in various regions, various locations throughout the Gulf in the event that Israel would attack, U.S. would likely support it, at least under President Bush administration. So U.S. forces are well prepped. Given Monday's U.S.-UK warship exercise maneuver in the Gulf, I think what the Pentagon is trying to show the world is that we're ready, but thankfully, again, Admiral Mike Mullen is calling for exhaustive diplomacy so that we don't have to pursue that route.
Why does Ahmadinejad and Iran continue to call for the destruction of the state of Israel? I mean, surely they know that is so provocative.
Well, what we're seeing now between Washington and Tehran, and a bit Tel Aviv, but primarily between Washington and Tehran, is the rhetoric that precipitates military action. Certainly the Bush administration is culpable of various rhetoric phrases, including the axis of evil. So we're seeing it on both sides, and it does diplomacy no good for either Washington or Tehran to engage in this. Ahmadinejad has changed his tune a bit, so now he's no longer calling for the destruction of Israel. But I think the damage was done. It's out in common parlance, but he's now trying to rescind what he said earlier.
Michael Shank, nice talking to you, sir. Thank you very much for your time today.
Dan, thanks for having me.